Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Pondering Christianity. So today we're going to actually be starting a three-part series looking into the biblical usage of cannabis, okay? And as I mentioned in the previous video, the reason we're doing this is because I think that this is going to become a heavily debated topic of conversation over the next 5 to 10 years as it legalizes across the United States. And so what I want to do is I want to try to arm Christians with a strong foundation of why I think, what I think about it, and why I want to take the approach I want to take. And so I want to kind of walk you guys through my thinking and why I think we need to take a very serious consideration and look at cannabis overall as it can be a tool for society. But the thing I want to do, though, is I want to start with what I believe is the most important thing, obviously, which is a biblical foundation as to how we are to interpret the usage of it, okay? So, without further ado. So, we want to get started with a biblical understanding. Whoa, got ahead of myself. Biblical look at medicine, okay? And so it's going to be done in 3 stages. Stage 1 is a biblical understanding. Stage 2 is medical scientific understanding. Stage 3, applicational proper usage understanding. Okay, so the 3 stages of what does God have to say on the topic, what does medicine and science have to say on the topic, and then finally, how do we apply those pieces of information into our everyday lives. And so, like I said, this is basically going to be the 3 different videos. Video 1, biblical understanding. Video 2, medical and scientific understanding. Video 3, applicational proper usage understanding. You're gonna get some insight as to the applicational proper usage understanding through the biblical understanding. They have some correlations between the two, so we'll get to see a lot of that today. I want to start with walking you guys through essentially verses on medicine, okay, and kind of biblical verses on medicine. So here are some top 5 that I have found. Jeremiah 8:22, is there no medicine in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why is there no healing for the wounds of my people? This is obviously God speaking through the prophet of Jeremiah. Ezekiel 47:11-12, yet its swamps and marshes will not be healed. They will be left for salt. All kinds of trees providing food will grow along both banks of the river. Their leaves will not wither, and their fruit will not fail. Each month they will bear fresh fruit because the water comes from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be used for food, and their leaves for medicine. Revelation 22:2, it flowed down the center of the main street. On each side of the river grew a tree bearing 12 crops of fruit. This is obviously referring to heaven. With a fresh crop each month, the leaves were used for medicine to heal the nations. Isaiah 38:21, Isaiah had to say to Hezekiah's servants, make an ointment from figs and spread it over the boil, and Hezekiah will recover. There's a direct application from another one of God's prophets for using ointments or leaves for creating mixtures to heal someone, a form of medicine. And then, of course, 2 Kings 27, then Isaiah said, make an ointment from figs. Here he is kind of talking about the same thing for healing, okay? So now let's continue on into looking into this, okay? So there is a heavily debated topic, of course, within the usage of alcohol. I think a majority of the Christian theologians, if you would, or the people or the pastors have kind of reached this understanding that you can drink alcohol. Some people just elect not to do it. Some people don't think it's biblical. But I think from a majority of the people that I've spoken to, or rather been in conversation with about it, the sentiment seems to be that alcohol is something that's to be respected, which I think is a healthy view of it. But here it is being used as alcohol, and I think it will provide some key insight as to why we should strongly consider alcohol as a great framework of how you would look at something like, say, cannabis, for example. Bible verses on that. 1 Timothy 5:23. Don't drink only water. You ought to drink a little wine for the sake of your stomach because you are sick so often. There's a lot of scientific research to show that utilizing wine can benefit the gut health. It can be an immune booster, and it can be beneficial in several other areas, such as antioxidants. But it can also exacerbate the issue in people. And so it requires a level of experimentation for you personally to see if it's going to be beneficial. But if it is beneficial, you can use it in a beneficial property. And here we see Paul recommending to Timothy that he should absolutely use it in a proactive and reactive medicine for gut health, such as, when I say proactive, obviously I mean consuming it beforehand to try to better the health. So kind of a daily consumption of it, something like a glass a day or something along those lines, is beneficial for the usage of your overall health, because it can, provided you don't have any kind of adverse reactions to it, be beneficial for your gut health, as well as reactive. Luke 10:33-34, then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. Cleansing of wounds. So essentially wine, the alcohol in the wine here is using as a means of cleansing the wound. And then Proverbs 31:6 gives strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those who are bitterly distressed. And in this case, it's being used as a painkiller and a relaxant. Now, I think that last portion is also extremely insightful. The cleansing of the wounds, great. Proactive, reactive medicine for gut health, also great. But painkiller and relaxant, those are both more along the lines of a psychological assistance. So it's kind of trying to put your mental state at more of relaxation. And strong drink to the one who is perishing is in that sense, you're using it as a painkiller to try to minimize the pain for the person. Because as you know, people can be in so much pain that it really clouds judgment, the way that they interact, their day-to-day life. And so in that sense, the Bible does speak of using wine in this Proverbs passage as a bit of a painkiller. Here comes the counter arguments, and Proverbs has its own counter argument right in its same book. So here I'll just read them to you guys. Ephesians 5:18, and do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. And I wanted to define for you guys what debauchery is, because I feel like this continues to capture the overall behavior component perfectly. Debauchery is defined as excessive indulgence in sensual pleasures. Excessive indulgence and sensual pleasures. That can be anything that's a sensual pleasure. It can be eating too much food. It can be drinking too much coffee. I mean, anything that's a sensual pleasure, you can commit debauchery with it. And then Proverbs 20:1, wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Okay. So let me kind of stop here and talk about this really quickly. What we see here is we see a healthy, balanced approach to how we should use medicine, okay? From the biblical passages, it shows us a healthy and complete understanding of, okay, medicine can be beneficial. However, you can take it too far and become a fool with it, especially as it pertains to alcohol. But any kind of substance that has an intoxicating effect, such as cannabis, there are forms of cannabis that have an extreme intoxication effect, of which you want to be cognizant of. But I would put it to you this way, that even if that the high itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, because even in that Proverbs passage, you see that wine can be used as a bit of a painkiller. So in that same instance, you can have someone who's in extreme levels of pain obviously use levels of a painkiller to assist with that, which is a common usage of cannabis. And the variation of pain can vary with the strain, of course. Again, I want to stress that the Bible does seem to very much advise us to have a balanced perspective of, yes, it is a gift. Yes, it is something we can use. However, we should not abuse it, because that's when you begin crossing the lines, and ultimately we want to have our high with the Spirit. Okay. All right, so here's something. I'm gonna link this paper. John F. Kilner, he has a PhD in divinity, and I wanted to I read one of his papers on this, and I think it really provided a lot of valuable insight for me. So I'm gonna link it in the description below. You're welcome to read it. I think it's like a 7-page paper. Won't take you a long time at all if you want to read it. I grabbed some quotes out of it because I think it really captures the things that we are trying to be aware of on the theological basis when it comes to medicine in general. Why is medicine a good thing? And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that provides a really great lens at how we should interpret the usage of medicine in our modern day society. And when I say medicine, I think that would be interchangeable for the word of technology, because medicine is a form of technology. Okay, so John F. Kilner, this is a quote I pulled out. A God-centered, reality-bounded, and love-impelled perspective is orientated toward life. Death from the beginning is induced in Scripture as something that is counter to God's intentions for creation. Paul characterizes death as the enemy, the last enemy that will be overcome. And he cites, obviously, where you can find that passage in Corinthians. You can trace that idea all the way back into Genesis and see that human death was something introduced by the fall. So death was not originally part of God's plan. It was something that was introduced by man through the fall. And so this is something that helps us understand that life is ultimately a feature of God's character. Life being a feature of God's character makes it something that we want to press forward as a fruit of the Spirit, is providing life to people. And that's why healing is so fantastic. Love, freedom, justice, etc. These things are good as they are reflections of God's nature, not God's themselves. So that's where you kind of start to want to be wary of, am I crossing the line? Am I beginning to see life or forms of justice or forms of freedom as a higher priority than what God is tasking me to do? And so ultimately, you don't want to allow those things to become idols in and of themselves and become your God, such as freedom. Because if freedom becomes your God in a vacuum, things that can become permitted because freedom is the ultimate priority and not God. And when you have God as the ultimate priority, it allows a balance of the spectrum, because now as God is a priority, you have to consider all of the attributes of God and not just this one attribute in a vacuumous state. And so that's ultimately where I think we get the healthiest perspective that we can get, is just taking the broad spectrum by looking at God's character as a whole and ultimately God himself. Therefore, it allows us to interpret it in the appropriate structure. Now, here you are. Seeking immortality through medicine is an idol. So I wanted to give you an example of how medicine can be taken too far and become an idol. Seeking immortality through medicine is an idol. Healing, when possible, is a reflection of God's love by eliminating unneeded suffering. And we saw in the passages earlier from the Bible, even in Jesus' ministry, Paul's ministry, a multitude of the disciples' ministry throughout the book of Acts, you see throughout the Old Testament, there's just this constant want and need to try to heal people when we can, but it can be taken too far. So it's a tale of two worlds of having the balance necessary in order to appropriately use that as a tool. And I felt like this quote summed it up really well. And this quote is, of course, by the same guy, John F. Kilner. This is the same paper. He says, "At the same time, we must recognize that there comes a point when there's nothing we can really do in behalf of life. All too often, we fail to recognize this, and we torture people in their dying. We devise means that are supposed to be for people's good, and we keep them hanging on the verge of death. That use of technology must be resisted. Treatment is refused or withdrawn not because death is intended as a physician-assisted suicide, but because death cannot be avoided." And this is the important component. As a Christian, we need to have the ability to live well and die well. And ultimately, medicine provides us a means of living well, but we can get too far in attempting to divert death by all means possible, which that is not the ultimate goal of this life. And as a Christian, we know that death is simply a transference between this life and the next life. And so that's where you need to be careful with medicine. Summary. So number one, life is good as it is a trait of God and was part of his intended blueprint. 2, Jesus was a great healer, showing we should heal when we can. 3, medicine works towards preservation and improvement of life. And that's why we know life, like I mentioned earlier in the arguments, we know life is good as it is a reflection of God's character. And therefore, that is something that we want to press forward ourselves, right? It's a fruit of the Spirit, living life abundantly, as it's defined within a biblical sense. And then medicine, however, can be abused in an attempt to idolize life itself, right? Or the medicine itself can become a priority. You can become a fool, drinking too much alcohol, smoking too much cannabis, eating too much cannabis, whatever it is, taking opiates, whatever it is, you can become a fool by overconsumption of that. And then 5, therefore balance is needed in furthering the exemplifying of the Spirit, but not interfering in the mission of the Spirit. That is really what I think is a strong, excellent biblical foundation to kind of go at evaluations of cannabis with, right? And so ultimately, we're left with the idea that medicine is good. We want to utilize medicine to heal people, but we need to have respect for medicine not being a god in and of itself. And so within those confines, we are using medicine to heal and help people, but ultimately we know that the greatest healing that they need and the spiritual healing that they need comes from the Holy Spirit. And again, that is our ultimate goal to get to them. But part of a way of showing love for them is to try to eliminate the pain as much as we possibly can for them. Okay, we don't want to see people in pain, and that's part of what drives us to do that, is the Holy Spirit acting through us. Okay, so that covers video 1 on biblical foundation. The next video next week will be the medical scientific analysis of cannabis to see if it in fact can be considered a medicine, or if it's just charading as one, and we're just trying to pass it because of only the we're only trying to pass it because of the psychological effects that it can have on us, the high, for example. So tune in next week for that video. In the meantime, if you guys liked today, comment what you thought. Do you disagree? Do you agree? Comment. Let me know. If you like the video, like the video. If you want to share it, that would be fantastic. But do me a favor, comment, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and I will see you guys next time. Keep on pondering.